Hello everyone, and welcome back to week 5 of the free online course Introduction to Islamic Art at Safe Cultural Heritage Group. Today we will be going through part 1 of the so-called Persianate arts of the book, written in Persian, discussing the arts of the book from the Ilkhanid Mongols to the Timurids. Let us start with the usefulness of animals from the late 13th century in the popular tradition of painting animals. It is like a European medieval bestiary, discussing the characteristics of each animal and its habits, and how different parts of it can be used to cure illnesses. Remember last week when we talked about the page layout and the red lines around the text block? To the left, we see a giraffe that is extending way beyond the frame. After all, giraffes really do have long necks, so this only emphasizes the animal's height. The birds in the trees serve as typically decorative devices that live in the lush landscape. On this page, there is also a panel with a larger and bolder angular inscription at the bottom, likely referring to the next entry. Another new device is that the painting is like a window. In the middle, you see a horse at the center and another horse's head to the right. So basically, the horse enters the painting from a space behind the frame. The tree here is inspired by Chinese paintings, likely because of trade, whereas the vegetation in the other painting is reminiscent of the framing plants we saw in Arabic painting. To the right, we see a mythical animal called Simurgh that is very important in Iranian mythology and that we will come across later. You can see its colorful feathers within a space that seems to be surrounded by water. Let's go to the next case study, the so-called Compendium of Chronicles, or Jami al-Tawarikh, composed by the Mongol vizier Rashid ad-Din. This book was commissioned by the Mongol Ilkhanid rulers of Iran to create a world history encompassing different religions and peoples around the world, basically to legitimize their own rulership. Rashid ad-Din probably had a large library at his disposal, so he mixed different textual traditions, for example, earlier Arabic historical works, and also Christian and Jewish literature. It is likely that the artists illustrating the manuscripts later on also drew inspirations from different painting traditions, using horizontal or square formats within the larger text block. To the left, in the painting on the mountains between India and Tibet, this interest in different cultures is visible, and it is greatly inspired by the high mountains and foliage of Chinese landscape painting. At the top right, in contrast, you can see the depiction of a famous story of the biblical prophet Jonah. Underneath, you can see the death of Moses, who is said to have passed away in the mountains. Here, the Chinese-style landscape seems to wrap around him, emphasizing this evocative atmosphere, which is also quite typical for Ilkhanid painting. Let's now move from the historical treatise to an epic, the Shahnameh, or Book of Kings, composed by Ferdowsi around 1000 CE. It is the most famous Persian poem in Iran about pre-Islamic Iranian kings, and written in verse, hence the text is divided into different columns. Also, it is the most illustrated text The oldest surviving transcript dates back to the early 13th century, but the earliest extant illustrated manuscript copy dates to the early 14th century. I am showing here to the left the one-page frontispiece of the so-called Friya Shahnameh from around 1300, probably produced in Baghdad. It consists of two paintings, a polo game at the top and at the bottom a hunting scene, which are both favorite pastime activities of the elite, which we already saw last week. If we look at the illustrations, they are again smaller than the text around them. To the right, you can see an interesting one about the game of chess. It was introduced from India to the Sasanian Empire in Iran, and it is mentioned in a 6th century book by the Persian Grand Vizier. Here you can see a specific instant of history. The Raja of India sent an envoy challenging the Iranian ruler to a game of chess because he wanted to avoid paying tribute to the Sasanians. But the clever vizier figured out how to play it and as such secured the tribute for his king. Next, I want to show you this famous manuscript called the Great Mongol Shahnameh from the early 14th century as well. It was purchased by an art dealer from Paris in the early 20th century, and then the leaves were split apart to be sold separately. There might have been originally around 200 illustrations, but only about 60 paintings are known. Here the horizontal format has gotten a bit bigger and more squarish, and the figures larger. This one shows Bahram Gur, a mythical hero and king on his horse, who has just slain the monstrous Karg, or horned wolf. You can see the blood splatter about and the heroic haloed figure of the brave and virtuous warrior king, with his weapons on full display and his horse trampling over the wolf. The Shahnameh was often used by subsequent Persian dynasties as well as a means of establishing a genealogy and to legitimize their rule over Iran. If we look at this next case study, we can see that there is a drastic change in the text-image relationship. Now the image is even larger than the text block, and only two small columns of script are shown within the painting. Now we can see that not only the main protagonists of the scene are depicted, but also additional figures, creating a specific ambience. Here we have Humay and Humayun, one of the 5 poems from the Khamsa of Khwaja Kirmani, completed in the first half of the 14th century. It is a love story of the Persian prince Humay, who is led to the queen of the fairies, who in turn shows him a portrait of Humayun, the daughter of the emperor of China. He falls in love with her, and through many adventures he is able to marry her and becomes the ruler of China. What is depicted here is a banquet in a garden, with trees, blossoming flowers and birds in the background, and groups of people encircling the couple who are sitting on an elevated throne. There are female musicians at the bottom right, and to the left an entourage of women carrying dishes or other objects. If you look closely, you can see that their robes are all patterned differently, and that there is a lot of variation in their gestures as well. Okay, next up, the Divan or collected poems of Sultan Ahmad Jalayir from the late 14th to the early 15th century. This one is interesting because we do not have the painting inside the text area, but actually outside in what is called the margins or borders. Most are one-page compositions featuring different landscape elements, figures, and animals. On the right page, there are a lot of golden clouds and winged figures peeking out of a hole in the upper right corner. On the other page, you see people moving through the landscape or engaged in doing agricultural work, also something we've seen before in Arabic book painting. One ox is actually coming out from behind the text block, which creates an interesting illusion as if there is more painting hidden underneath. Also, these paintings or drawings are not illustrations of the poem, because nothing of the images corresponds directly to the text. They could be popular designs or refer to a change in aesthetic because of the introduction of Chinese paper with monochrome painting or print on it. We will come across these marginal paintings again later. We also find the so-called Timurid workshop album with drawings and designs pasted onto different pages. Here you have multiple different depictions in various shapes and sizes. There is a horse with wings in the upper right corner, next to it an elliptical medallion design with birds, below a drawing of flowers and other animals, dense vegetation and mythological creatures, but also studies of figures and compositions to the right towards the bottom. Interestingly, they seem to be not arranged in a specific order, but pasted randomly next to facing different directions. These may have been used by workshops in other media, like metalwork or textile. In the Timurid dynasty, the genre of anthologies also became popular. These were manuscripts containing multiple texts by different authors. The anthologies could combine popular religious, narrative, and lyrical poetry, as well as treatises in prose. So, for example, the Shahnameh and the Khamseh we've already looked at. A particularly important patron was not the founder, Timur, but his grandson, Iskandar. In this example, we actually see his name patron, Alexander the Great, visiting a hermit. You can notice the intricate details of Alexander's clothing and his crown, and the hermit in the cave to the right, his face rubbed off. Particularly interesting is the starry sky and the flowery tree in the upper left corner, and the onlooker with his horse, witnessing the scene and also guiding the viewer's gaze towards the main action. These kinds of witness figures are seen very often in Persian painting. Also, have a look at the strange layout. Here the image encompasses the whole text block, while this column of text is put onto the image like an upper frame. Usually these columns are set around a text to add a commentary or a different text altogether. Here we actually have Iskandar's personal horoscope book, which was quite common to have in the medieval Middle East, but this one is one of the finest examples of its kind. It was cast in 1411 and was produced in Iskandar's Royal Kitabkhane, which is a book workshop. Multiple specialists work together. There are many interesting astronomical features here, as well as vibrant colors and complex compositions. It was supposed to represent his good fortune and future victories, but actually he ruled only for 5 years before he died. Of course, there were different centers of production, like in the cities of Shiraz or Herat. Typical for Shiraz is the three-sided marginal column around the text block, which we've seen before in the anthology, here to the right. The painting to the left suddenly bursts out of the page and onto the margins. We see a dense, hilly landscape with a brick architecture in the back and steps leading up to a door. But in the center, the main action is taking place. Again, a hero slaying a so-called thief, a monstrous creature in Iranian mythology that has horns and zoomorphic features. There is a lot of action here, highlighted by the dynamic composition. We see a Herati-style painting with an even greater focus on the landscape and architecture surrounding the main scene, which is again a fight. But the central scene on the left is actually pretty small compared to the large rocky outcrop surrounding the palace walls and the colorful architecture itself. Again, you can see features we looked at during our architecture session. The colorful brick facades with lots of glazed blue bricks and tiles, words inscribed on the walls and over the door panel, dome structures, and high walls, here with soldiers patrolling on them. You can see arabesque decoration and a great emphasis on detail. Also in the back you have again these witnessing figures, in this case women, enlarged to the left. Another dynamic composition is to the right. This fight of the hero with the dragon in the foreground. A very dynamic and colorful scene with the hero's horse looking at the action unfolding from behind the rocks. Let us now turn to a particular painter named Behzad, who worked at the Herati court in the late 15th and early 16th centuries and actually signed some of his works. But later on, paintings were also ascribed to him by signing them with his name, so it's a bit tricky. This poetic manuscript, the Bustan of Sa'di from 1488, also included Behzad's signature. The painting depicts the seduction of Yusuf, and the signature is tucked away in a small panel within the architecture to the left of the figures. Yusuf is another biblical poet, a prophet, here with a fiery halo and his face rubbed off. He's known for his beauty, and the ruler's wife falls in love with him. She tries to seduce him. This is actually happening here. You can see Suleika kneeling at the top right and reaching out to him. Yusuf is trying to flee, and there is a series of doors that are all closed and the staircase leading down to the main entrance, so a long way of escape. There are many different planes and various text panels in between the architecture, which also include verses of another Persian poet, Jami, with strong moralistic quotations. This painting might be related to Sufism, to abandon material goods, to come closer to God. Also, we see again arabesque decoration, geometric designs, floral patterns, inscription panels, and a very vibrant coloring. I will stop here for now. I hope you enjoyed today's lecture. Thank you very much for listening. In part 2, we will talk about Safavid and Mughal book painting.